The tape was 18 minutes long. No sound, no timestamp, no movement. Just a woman sitting alone in a dark television studio, her hands flat on a desk, waiting for something that never came. The tape was recorded in 1991. I was born in 1991, and the woman on the tape was me. But I didn't find the tape first. Before that, the station showed me my name, then my handwriting, then my address, then an employee file proving I had worked there for 4 years before I existed. By the time I finally watched the recording, I already knew what I was going to see. I just didn't know what it meant. I should start with the station, because everything that happened began there. The station was WRHP-TV, Channel 34, a PBS affiliate that served 3 counties in the central Susquehanna Valley from 1971 to 2024. It was never important. It ran nature programming, local government broadcasts, school concert specials, and a weekly agricultural report that outlived every other show on the schedule by 2 decades. When the Corporation for Public Broadcasting pulled its affiliate support and the county consortium couldn't cover the gap, the board voted to close operations by the end of March. I was hired in January to help with the decommission. My name is Nora Gatch. I was 34. I'd spent 6 years doing contract archival work for regional libraries, historical societies, and 2 other small stations that had closed before WRHP. I was not a broadcast professional. I was a cataloger. My job was to go through the building's physical and digital records, determine what had preservation value, flag what could be transferred to the State Broadcasting Archive in Harrisburg, and prepare the rest for disposal. I worked alone. The station had reduced to a skeleton staff of 4. A station manager named Dennis Kowal, who was 61 and had been there since 1994. A master control operator named Phyllis, who handled the final automated broadcast cycles. A maintenance tech named Garza, who kept the HVAC and plumbing functional through the winter, and me. The building was a single-story cinder block structure on a frontage road east of Selinsgrove, set back behind a gravel lot in a transmission tower that hadn't carried a live signal in 3 years. Everything had been automated or relayed from Harrisburg since 2021. Inside, the layout was a long central hallway with offices on the left, 2 small studios on the right, a control room, a break room, and a back section that had been built out in the early 80s as a combination library and storage area. This was my workspace. It had floor-to-ceiling metal shelving on 3 walls, a long table, a microfilm reader that didn't work, and a desk with a computer connected to the station's internal network, which was itself a relic. A Novell-based system that had been partially migrated to Windows in 2003 and then abandoned mid-migration when funding ran out. I want to be clear about the building. It was not atmospheric. It was not the kind of place that suggests horror. It was ugly, functional, and smelled like old carpet and toner. The hallway lights buzzed. The men's bathroom had been out of order since October. The vending machine in the break room still worked, but only dispensed 1 item, a package of peanut butter crackers that cost $1.25. This was an ordinary place of ordinary work. And I mention these details because everything that follows happened inside that ordinariness. And I need you to understand that nothing about the building prepared me for any of it. I want to be careful here. I'm not telling this story because something jumped out of a tape and chased me. Nothing like that happened. What happened was administrative. It was evidentiary. And it was worse than anything I could have invented because it didn't ask me to believe in the impossible. It just showed me documentation that I couldn't explain, and then it kept showing me more, and every piece of it was ordinary. I started in the library on January 6th. The first 2 weeks were physical media shelves of 3/4-inch U-matic tapes, a smaller collection of 1-inch Type-C reels, and about 40 banker's boxes of VHS dubs that had been made for community distribution. I cataloged and condition assessed them and began boxing the U-matics for transfer. None of this was unusual. The content was what you'd expect from a small market PBS affiliate. pledge drives, school district profiles, a 1988 series on covered bridges, some State House feeds. I wore gloves. I labeled. I moved through the shelves left to right, top to bottom. Each tape got a line in my spreadsheet. Title, format, date, condition, shelf location, transfer recommendation. I worked methodically. I have always worked methodically. It is the one quality I trust in myself without reservation. During those 2 weeks, I also familiarized myself with the building's layout and the habits of the other 3 staff. Dennis arrived at 8 and left by 4. Phyllis worked a split-shift mornings for system checks, evenings for the automated broadcast window. Garza came and went on no fixed schedule, appearing when something needed repair and otherwise staying in his truck in the lot, listening to AM radio. None of them spent much time in the library. It was my space, and by the end of the second week, I had arranged it the way I arrange every workspace I'm given. Supplies on the left, active projects in the center, completed materials on the right, personal items, a water bottle, a fleece I kept on the chair back, a small clock in the same positions I've used at every job. I don't think about this arrangement. I replicate it automatically, the way some people always sit in the same seat. It was on January 22nd, in the third week, that Dennis asked me to also catalog the personnel and administrative records before they were shredded. The station's HR function had been handled internally for most of its life. There was no centralized system, just paper files in a locking cabinet in the front office. He gave me the key and told me to pull anything with historical or legal retention value and flag the rest for destruction. I brought the first drawer back to the library that afternoon. It covered A through D, alphabetically. The folders were mostly thin, 1 or 2 pages per person, sometimes a higher letter, sometimes just a W-4 and a termination date. Small stations cycle through part-time employees constantly. College students, retirees, local freelancers. I entered each name into a spreadsheet with hire date, role, and separation date. The work was quiet and repetitive, the kind of clerical task that requires just enough attention to prevent errors, but not enough to prevent your mind from wandering. I processed 41 folders that afternoon. I found my name in the second drawer. The folder tab read Gatch, Nora E., and it was in the correct alphabetical position between Furman, Dale, and Geller, Timothy. It was not thin. It was about a 1/4 inch thick, held together with a binder clip. Inside was a hire letter dated March 3rd, 1987, addressed to Nora E. Gatch, offering a part-time position as librarian/media archivist at WRHP-TV, Channel 34, at a rate of $7.25 per hour, 20 hours per week. The letter was signed by the station manager at the time, a man named Harold Pfeiffer. I set it down and looked at it for a long time. My first name is Nora. My middle initial is E. My last name is Gatch. It is not a common name. There are fewer than 400 people in the United States with that surname, and I've never met one I wasn't related to. I was born in 1991. In March of 1987, I did not exist. I assumed it was a relative. My grandmother's maiden name was not Gatch. That's my father's side, but I thought perhaps a cousin or an aunt I hadn't heard of had worked here decades ago by coincidence. I kept reading. The second page was a photocopy of a driver's license, submitted as identity verification. The license was issued by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The photo was my face, not a face that looked like mine, not a family resemblance. My face at approximately my current age, with my current haircut the same slightly uneven bob I'd been wearing for 2 years. The name on the license read Nora Ellen Gatch. My middle name is Ellen. The date of birth on the license was listed as June 14th, 1961. I put everything back in the folder. I closed it. I pressed my hands flat on the table and sat there for what I think was 10 minutes. Then I opened the folder again and went through every page. Here is what the folder contained, in order. The hire letter dated March 1987, the license photocopy, A W-4 form filled out in handwriting I will discuss in a moment. A series of bi-weekly time cards from March 1987 through November 1991, each one signed. A performance review from 1988, positive, noting strong organizational skills and a quiet, methodical approach. A second performance review from 1990, also positive, with a note that the employee had taken on additional responsibilities in tape logging and had volunteered to assist during pledge weeks without additional compensation. A written warning from August 1991 concerning an incident I'll describe later. A resignation letter dated November 15th, 1991, and a forwarding address form filled out on the day of separation, listing an address for future correspondence. The forwarding address was 414 Priestley Avenue, Apartment 2, Northumberland, Pennsylvania. That is my current address. I have lived there since September of the previous year. I need to describe the handwriting. I am not a handwriting expert. I have no forensic training, but I have spent 6 years looking at my own handwriting on catalog cards, intake forms, condition reports, and institutional paperwork. I know what my writing looks like, the way I form my capital N with a slight backward lean, the way my lowercase g drops below the line farther than most people's, the way I cross my T's with a rising stroke that my college roommate once said looked like a bird taking off. The handwriting on the W-4, on every time card, on the warning acknowledgement, and on the resignation letter was mine. Not similar, not in the same style. Mine, with every idiosyncrasy I recognize as my own. I counted the time cards. There were 43. Each one bore 2 signatures, the employee's and the supervisor's. The employee's signature on every card read Nora Gatch in the same hand. I laid one of them next to a condition report I'd written the previous week. I held them side by side under the desk lamp and compared them character by character. The letter spacing was identical. The pen pressure was identical. The slight rightward drift that happens in my writing when I'm moving quickly was present on 17 of the 43 cards, consistent with someone occasionally rushing at the end of a shift. I did not tell Dennis that day. I did not tell him the next day. I finished the A through D drawer, skipping my own folder, and started on E through H. I entered the other names into the spreadsheet. I worked normally. I drove home to Northumberland that evening, 18 minutes on Route 11, past the river, past the shuttered fabric mill, past the Presbyterian church with the digital sign that always displayed a Bible verse and the current temperature, and I sat in my apartment and tried to build a rational explanation. The most logical possibility was a prank. Dennis, or someone on the remaining staff, had assembled the folder as a joke to unsettle the new contractor working alone in the back of a building that was about to be demolished. But the folder was physically aged in a way that was consistent with the others. The paper had the same yellowing, the same brittle clip, the same dust pattern on the edges. The higher letter was typed on a typewriter whose ribbon quality matched the other letters from the same period, slightly faded, with the characteristic smudging of a Selectric that needed a new ribbon, and the driver's license photocopy was on the same thermal fax paper that the station used for ID copies in the 80s. I'd seen dozens of them in other folders, all with the same slightly pink discoloration that thermal paper develops over decades. A prank would require forging nearly 43 time cards, aging the paper, sourcing the correct typewriter ribbon, producing a fake driver's license photocopy on period-appropriate stock, and doing all of it before I arrived. It would also require knowing my middle name, my handwriting, and my current address. Dennis had my name from the contract, but he did not have my middle name, and he certainly did not have samples of my handwriting before I started work. The second possibility was a genuine coincidence. Another Nora Ellen Gatch had worked here in the 80s and happened to share my name, my face, my handwriting, and my current address. I could not make this explanation hold together no matter how I rearranged it. The third possibility was the one I didn't have a name for. I set it aside and went to bed. I did not sleep well. I kept thinking about the 43 time cards, signed one by one over 4.5 years by a hand that wrote exactly like mine. On January 24th, I returned to the building and went directly to the personnel cabinet. I pulled the complete set of drawers and searched for any other folder that cross-referenced the name Gatch. I found nothing. I checked every hire letter from the 1985 to 1992 window for any mention of the librarian position. Nothing. No one else had held the role before or after her. A note in the 1993 budget file explained that the position had been eliminated after the incumbent resigned and was not refilled due to funding. I then went to the station's internal scheduling system, the old Novell database that Dennis had told me not to bother with because it was a mess nobody ever cleaned up. I sat at the library terminal and navigated into it. The system was primitive. It had been used from approximately 1985 to 2004 for internal scheduling, time tracking, and a basic inventory of station assets. The interface was text-based, green on black, and navigated with keyboard commands that I had to figure out by trial and error, typing help at every prompt and reading the responses that came back in blocky monospace text. I found the employee directory module and searched for Gatch. One result, Gatch Nora E. Employee ID 8703-09. Hire date March 3, 1987. Role LIB/ARCHPT. Status separated. Separation date November 22, 1991. Supervisor P. Pfeiffer H. Notes see incident file 91-08-14. I opened the incident file. It was a text record, about 200 words. It described an event on August 14, 1991, in which the employee Nora Gatch was observed by the station manager and one other staff member in Studio B after hours at approximately 11:40 p.m. during a period when the building should have been unoccupied. The employee was seated at the studio's anchor desk with the studio lights off. The employee was not performing any work function. When approached, the employee stated that she had come in to check something and could not specify what. The station manager noted that the employee's access badge had not been scanned at entry, and the exterior door had been found locked from the outside. The employee was issued a written warning for unauthorized after-hours presence and could not explain how she had entered the building. I read this 3 times. Then I searched the scheduling module for any shift assignments under my employee ID. The system returned a full record. From March 1987 through November 1991, Nora Gatch had been scheduled for Tuesday and Thursday shifts, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., and occasional Saturday mornings during pledge periods. The schedule was granular. It included shift swaps, sick day notations, and 2 vacation holds, one in June 1988, one in December 1989. It was a complete, unremarkable employment record for a part-time worker across 4.5 years. The kind of record that accumulates without drama, one entry at a time, the way sediment builds. 4.5 years of shifts, 43 time cards signed, 2 performance reviews written by a supervisor who is now dead, an incident report witnessed by 2 people, a resignation letter in my handwriting. I decided to verify the supervisor. Harold Pfeiffer had been station manager from 1979 to 1996. I found his obituary in the station's archive clippings, a folder of newspaper tear sheets that someone had maintained through the early 2000s. He died in 2011 at 83. Survived by a wife, 2 sons, 4 grandchildren, 23 years at WRHP, a quiet, dedicated public servant. I could not ask him. The incident report named one other witness, a production assistant named Cheryl Moyer. I searched the personnel files and found her folder. She had worked at WRHP from 1985 to 1993. Her folder included a home address in Sunbury and a phone number that was almost certainly disconnected. I wrote down the address. That night, I called my father. I asked him, as casually as I could manage, whether any relative on his side had ever lived in the Susquehanna Valley or worked in television. He said no. I asked if there had ever been another Nora in the family. He said I was named after his grandmother, Nora Kessler, who had died in 1974 and had never left Cambria County in her life. I asked if he'd ever heard of anyone in the family working at a TV station. He laughed and said the Gatches were truck drivers and concrete workers, and I was the first one to sit at a desk for a living. I asked as carefully as I could whether there had been any family estrangements, cousins who moved away, relatives nobody talked about. He said no. The Gatches were a small family, and everyone knew everyone. There was no missing branch. I did not tell him what I'd found. Over the next week, I continued cataloging as normal during the day and spent the evenings researching. I pulled the station's broadcast logs from 1987 to 1991, paper binders stored on the bottom shelf, labeled by year, each one containing daily sheets with time-stamped entries for every program, break, and station identification aired. These were FCC-required records of everything broadcast, initialed by the on-duty operator. I was looking for any log entry initialed by NG or GATCH. I found them starting in September 1988. From that date forward, the Saturday Pledge period logs were periodically initialed NG at the start and end of interstitial breaks, which was consistent with a part-time librarian pulling extra shifts to assist with live programming. The initials matched mine, the same N with its backward lean, the same G with its deep descender. I photographed every one. There were 26 across 3 years. I also checked the station's correspondence files for the same period. Most of the outgoing mail was form letters to donors or license renewal paperwork. But in the 1989 folder, I found a memo from Harold Pfeiffer to the board of directors dated April 12, 1989, recommending that the part-time librarian position be converted to full-time due to the volume of cataloging work required. The memo noted that Ms. Gatch has proven exceptionally reliable, and her catalog system has already improved our ability to locate and reuse archived material. She approaches the work with a seriousness that exceeds the requirements of the position. The board denied the request. Budget constraints. The memo had a handwritten note in the margin, in a hand I didn't recognize, probably Harold's. Told Nora. She said she understood. Didn't seem surprised. She didn't seem surprised because I wouldn't have been surprised. I have been told no by every institution I've worked for. I've been the part-time contractor, the temporary hire, the person who does full-time work at part-time pay and accepts it because the alternative is no work at all. I would have said I understood. I would not have been surprised. On February 3rd, I logged back into the Novell system and searched for the Asset Inventory module. I'd been told the station had at one point maintained an internal catalog of its tape library, a digital card catalog essentially, that had been started in the mid-'80s and abandoned when funding for a proper system never materialized. I found it after 20 minutes of navigating dead-end menus and empty directories. The catalog was partial. It covered roughly 1986 to 1993 and contained about 2,000 entries for tapes, reels, and film elements. Each entry had a title, format, date, duration, and the name or initials of the person who had logged it. I searched for entries logged by Gatch or NG. 412 entries. Nora Gatch had cataloged 412 tapes during her employment at WRHP. The entries were detailed, specific, and consistent, each one noting the tape's physical condition, content summary, and storage location using a shelf numbering system that still matched the labels on the shelves in the room where I was sitting. The system used a row and position format, row 1 through row 9, with positions numbered sequentially within each row. She had designed it. I was sure of this because it was the same system I use, not similar, the same. Row as the primary sort, position as the secondary, with a hyphen between. Row 3, position 12 became 3-12. I use this format because it's efficient and unambiguous. She used it for the same reason, or I use it because she did, or we both use it because we are the same person using it for the first time, twice. I got up and checked. The shelf numbers in her catalog entries corresponded to the actual shelves. The tapes she had cataloged were, in many cases, still in the positions she had assigned them. I had been handling them for 3 weeks. I had been touching tapes that she had touched tapes that I had touched tapes that someone with my name and my hands had organized 37 years before I started the same job in the same room. I spent the rest of that day cross-referencing her catalog entries against my own spreadsheet. Of the 412 tapes she had logged, 387 were still in the library. The matches were exact same shelf positions, same condition notes updated only by the natural degradation of magnetic media over time. She had written "condition good" on a tape in 1989, and I had written "condition fair minor edge damage" on the same tape in 2025. 36 years of aging tracked by the same cataloger across 2 bodies. I want to be honest about what I felt. It was not terror. It was something more disorienting than that. It was the feeling of encountering evidence that your life is not the first draft, that someone already ran the sequence "your name in this building, your hands on these shelves, your handwriting on these cards, and what you're doing now is not original. It's a repetition. And the repetition is so faithful that it produced the same address, the same haircut, the same shelf numbering system, the same idiosyncratic letter forms. I did not feel haunted. I felt redundant. On February 5th, I drove to Sunbury and found Cheryl Moyer. She was 71 and lived in the same house listed in her personnel folder, a narrow 2-story with a porch swing and a garden that was dormant under a thin layer of snow. I told her I was working on the WRHP decommission and asked if she'd be willing to share some memories of the station for the historical record. She invited me in and made coffee and talked for an hour about the pledge drives and the Christmas concert specials and the time a bat got into Studio A during a live taping of the Agricultural Report. She remembered specific camera angles, specific donor names, the exact brand of coffee they kept in the break room in 1990. She was warm and precise and exactly the kind of person who volunteers details without being asked. I waited until she'd run through her anecdotes, and then I said, "Do you remember a librarian named Nora Gatch?" Cheryl set her coffee down. She didn't set it down the way people do when they're startled. She set it down the way people do when they want both hands free, because the conversation just became something that requires their full attention. She said, "Of course I do. Quiet girl, kept to herself. She was very good at the job, but she was odd. Not in a bad way. Just private. She'd come in, do her work, leave. Never ate lunch in the break room. I'd see her eating at her desk in the library. Same thing every day. An apple and a sandwich in a paper bag. She wore the same few outfits in rotation. She looked like someone who was trying not to be noticed. I eat an apple and a sandwich at my desk every day. I wear the same few outfits in rotation. I am someone who is trying not to be noticed. I have been that person my entire life." I asked what Nora looked like. Cheryl described me. Height about 5'6", build thin but not frail. Hair brown, cut short, a bob that wasn't quite even, a little longer on the left side. Shoulders held slightly forward, like she was always bracing for something or trying to take up less space. She said, she had a way of looking at you when you talked to her, very focused, very still, like she was recording everything. Not unfriendly, just precise. I have been told by 3 different people in my life that I look at them like I'm recording everything. I asked about the incident in August 1991, the after-hours presence in Studio B. Cheryl's expression changed. She became careful. Her hands moved to her lap. Harold asked me to come with him because he didn't want to confront a female employee alone at night. Liability. We drove over together. I lived close. He called me at home. We went in through the front door with his key. The building was dark except for the exit signs. We could hear the HVAC running, but nothing else. We walked to Studio B because that's where the motion sensor had tripped. Harold had had one installed after some equipment went missing in '89. She paused. We opened the studio door and she was there, sitting at the desk, not the anchor desk actually, the side desk, the one the guests used during the interview segments. She was just sitting. The lights were off, but the emergency exit sign lit the room enough that we could see her. She wasn't doing anything. She wasn't asleep. She was sitting with her hands flat on the desk like she was waiting for an appointment. I asked what happened when they spoke to her. Harold said her name. He said, "Nora, what are you doing here?" And she looked at us, not startled, not guilty, not confused exactly, but dislocated. That's the word I'd use. Like she'd been somewhere else in her mind, and our voices pulled her back. She said, "I'm sorry. I thought it was my shift." Harold told her it was almost midnight, and there were no shifts. She looked at her watch. She looked at the exit sign. She looked at the desk under her hands. And I watched her face change. It was like watching someone realize they've been sleepwalking. That moment when the waking world reasserts itself, and you can't explain how you got where you are. I asked if Nora had said anything else. She said, "I just wanted to check the catalog." She said it very quietly, almost to herself, and then she stood up and walked past us and left the building. Harold and I stood there for a minute. He checked the doors. Everything was locked. Her badge hadn't been scanned. There was no sign of forced entry. He couldn't explain how she'd gotten in, and she couldn't either. He wrote it up, and that was the end of it. She resigned a couple months later. No drama. She submitted a letter and returned her badge, and that was the last any of us saw her. I asked if Cheryl had ever seen Nora again after that. No, nobody did as far as I know. She didn't leave a phone number, just the forwarding address. Harold sent her final check there, and it was cashed, so we knew the address was good. But she never came back, never called, never wrote. I asked one more question, one I hadn't planned to ask, but that came out before I could stop it. I asked Cheryl if Nora had any particular physical habit, any gesture or tic. Cheryl thought about it. She tilted her head, she said, before she went through a doorway. Every time. She'd pause for just a second and tilt her head to the left, like she was listening for something on the other side. I noticed it because I walked behind her in the hallway 100 times, and she did it every single time. I asked her about it once, and she said she didn't know she was doing it. I tilt my head before every doorway. I have done it since childhood. I do not know why. I thanked Cheryl and drove home. I sat in my apartment, 414 Priestley Avenue, Apartment 2, the forwarding address that Nora Gatch had written on her separation form in November 1991. I had found this apartment on a rental listing website in August of the previous year. I had chosen it because it was affordable, close to the WRHP job site, and available on short notice. I had never been to Northumberland before. I had no connection to this town, this street, or this building prior to moving here. And yet someone with my exact name had directed her mail here 33 years before I arrived. I checked with my landlord the next day. His name was Peterson, and he'd owned the building since 2012, having bought it from an estate. He had no records going back to the early 90s. The previous owner was deceased, a woman named Ruth Klein, who had died in 2010. Ruth's estate attorney was also deceased. I tried the county recorder's office and found deed transfers for the property, but no tenant records. Rental records are not public documents. The trail was cold in every direction I could reach, and warm in every direction I couldn't. On February 10th, I made a decision that I spent several days reconsidering before I carried it out. I went back into the Novell system and opened the catalog module. I navigated to the end of Nora Gatch's entries, the 412th entry, the last one she had made. The last catalog entry was dated November 12, 1991, 3 days before her resignation letter. It was for a tape labeled WRHP-LIB-9111-03. described as local origination, unscheduled studio B, no broadcast date condition. Good note, for internal reference only. Do not circulate. Every other entry in her catalog was specific about content. Selins Grove Borough Council meeting, October 4th, 88. Or Pledge Break B-roll, autumn 1990. Or Agricultural Report episode 312, Dairy Farming segment, March 15th, 89. This was the only entry with no content description, just a format note and a restriction. I looked at the shelf location she'd assigned it, row 7, position 34. I walked to row 7. Position 34 was empty, but the dust pattern on the shelf showed that something had sat there for a long time and been removed relatively recently, within the last few years, based on the dust line. The outline was the right size and shape for a U-matic cassette in a standard case. I searched the rest of the library. I searched the studios. I searched the break room storage closet, in the maintenance area, and the crawl space above the drop ceiling in the hallway where Garza stored spare fluorescent tubes. I searched Dennis's office while he was at lunch, carefully and quickly, checking the bookshelves and the cabinet behind his desk. I could not find the tape. On February 12th, I asked Dennis if any tapes had been removed from the library before I started. He said that a small batch had been pulled about 2 years ago when the State Archive did a preliminary survey of what they might want. He had a receipt somewhere. He found it after 10 minutes of searching his desk, a one-page list of 14 tapes that had been transferred to Harrisburg for evaluation in 2022, signed by a state archivist whose name I didn't recognize. WRHP-LIB-9111-03 was on the list. I called the State Broadcasting Archive in Harrisburg the next morning. I spoke with a woman named Dana in the acquisitions department and explained that I was cataloging WRHP's holdings and needed to verify the status of materials transferred in 2022. She looked up the accession records and confirmed that 13 of the 14 tapes had been received, evaluated, and returned to WRHP. The 14th WRHP-LIB-9111-03 had been received, evaluated, and retained. It was currently in their climate-controlled vault, cataloged but not digitized, classified as low priority for preservation due to limited content. I asked what the evaluation notes said about its content. Dana read them to me. U-matic 3/4-inch cassette, approximately 18 minutes of recorded content. Studio interior, single fixed camera angle, no audio track. One female subject seated at a desk in an unlit studio. Subject does not speak or move for the duration of the recording. No identification of subject in frame or on labeling. Tape is in good physical condition with minor tracking artifacts. Retention recommended for completeness of station holdings. Priority, low. An 18-minute recording of a woman sitting at a desk in an unlit studio, not speaking, not moving, made sometime before November 12th, 1991, and cataloged by Nora Gatch as her final professional act at the station. I asked Dana if I could view the tape. She said I'd need to submit a research request and schedule an appointment at the archive's viewing facility. I submitted the request that afternoon by email, citing the WRHP decommission as justification. The earliest available appointment was February 24th. I had 12 days to wait. I spent them doing my job. I continued the catalog and the personnel files and the broadcast logs. I moved through the building room by room, documenting equipment for the disposal inventory. I was professional and methodical because that is what I am, but I was also, during every waking minute, carrying a question I could not put down. What was on that tape, and was it going to be me? Not someone who looked like me, sitting at the same desk that Cheryl described, in the same posture Cheryl described, hands flat, waiting. During those 12 days, 3 other things happened that I need to record. The first was small. On February 14th, I found a station identification card in the bottom of a supply drawer in the library. the kind of laminated badge that employees wore on a lanyard. It had been used and re-laminated at least once based on the slightly bubbled surface. The name on the badge was Nora Gatch. The photo was my face, clearer than the license photocopy, sharp enough that I could see the small scar on my left eyebrow from a childhood fall. The badge was assigned employee number 8703-09. I turned it over. On the back, someone had written in pencil, in my handwriting, a single line, "Check row 7 before you go." The shelf was still empty, but I now knew that the person who had written this note expected someone to find it, expected someone to be standing in this room, going through these drawers, looking at these shelves, expected specifically me or someone close enough to me to understand the instruction. And the instruction was written on the back of a badge, hidden in a drawer, where only someone doing the exact work I was doing would ever find it. It was not a message left for the general public. It was a message left for the next archivist, for the next iteration. The second thing happened on February 17th. I went back to the resignation letter in the personnel file and read it slowly, word by word, for the third time. I had glanced at it during my initial discovery, but hadn't absorbed it fully. Now I did. Dear Mr. Pfeiffer, I am writing to resign my position effective November 22nd, 1991. I have appreciated the opportunity to work at WRHP, and I am proud of the catalog I have built. I believe it will be useful to whoever continues this work. I want to be clear that my departure is voluntary and not related to the incident in August. I understand why the warning was issued, and I accept it. I was in the building that night because I believed it was my scheduled shift. I now understand that this belief was in error, but I want to note that the error felt completely real to me, and I am not confident it will not happen again. For that reason, and others I cannot easily explain, I think it is better for me to leave. I have cataloged everything I was able to reach. The last tape is the only one I could not fully describe. I am sorry for that. It is not incomplete because I was careless. It is incomplete because I do not know how to describe what is on it, and I do not think I should be the one to try. Please forward any correspondence to the address on the attached form. Sincerely, Nora Gatch. She cataloged a tape she couldn't describe. She left the building. She sent her mail to my apartment, and she wrote her letter in my handwriting, with my phrasing patterns, with the same slightly formal register I use in professional correspondence, the same tendency to over-explain my reasoning, the same instinct to preempt judgment by admitting fault before it's assigned, the same habit of ending with a practical instruction rather than an emotional statement. I know how I write. I know what my voice sounds like on paper. This woman wrote like me. Not approximately. Exactly. And the content of the letter, the apology for an incomplete entry, the acknowledgement that she didn't know how to describe something, the statement that she didn't think she should be the one to try read, like something I would write if I encountered data I couldn't classify. I would use exactly those words. I would feel exactly that professional discomfort. The third thing happened on February 19th. I was leaving the building at the end of the day, walking across the gravel lot in the dark. It got dark by 5:30, and the parking lot had one light that worked, casting an orange cone over the area near the door, and Garza was sitting in his truck with the window down, smoking. He'd barely spoken to me in 6 weeks. He was a quiet man in his 50s who did his work and left, but as I walked to my car, he said, "You're the second one." I stopped. He said, "You're the second Nora, right? I've been watching you work and I thought maybe it's a coincidence, but it's not, is it?" I asked him what he meant. "I started here in '86. I was 19, maintenance apprentice. I knew the first Nora. She was here when I got hired. She worked in the library, same as you. She looked like you. She talked like you. She had the same walk, that thing you do where you tilt your head before you go through a doorway, like you're listening for something on the other side. She did that. I watched her do it for 4 years, and she sat at her desk the same way you sit, and she put her coffee cup in the same spot, left side, back corner, handle facing out. I've been watching you for 6 weeks, and I can't find one thing that's different. I do put my coffee cup on the left side, back corner, handle facing out. I do it because it's out of the way of my working hand. She did it for the same reason. Or I do it because she did. There is no way to determine which. I asked Garza why he hadn't said anything sooner. Because what would I say? Hey, you look like someone who worked here in the 80s? People look like other people. Families repeat. But you don't just look like her. You move like her. You organize the same way. You even smell the same. I don't mean perfume. I mean the way a person smells, underneath everything. I stood behind you in the break room last week, and it was like standing behind a person who's been dead for 30 years, and I had to walk away because I couldn't process it. I asked if he remembered the night in Studio B. I wasn't there, but Harold told me about it the next day. He was shaken, badly. He'd worked in broadcasting for 15 years at that point, and nothing fazed him. But this fazed him. He said she looked like she didn't know where she was, or when she was. That's what he said, when she was. He said it was the only time in his career he was genuinely frightened by an employee, and she wasn't doing anything threatening. She was just sitting there, in the dark, like she was waiting for a shift that didn't exist. I asked Garza one more question. I asked if he believed I was the same person. He dropped his cigarette and ground it out on the edge of his truck door and let the remains fall into the gravel. He didn't look at me when he answered. He looked at the building. I don't know what I believe, but I'll tell you what I noticed. She resigned in November of 91. You were born in 91. Not the same month maybe, but the same year. Like something ended and something started, like a shift change. I was born in June of 1991. She resigned in November. 5 months. I don't know what to do with that, and I'm recording it here because I don't know what to do with any of this. And recording things is the only skill I have that still feels like mine, though I am no longer certain it is mine. It may be hers, it may be ours. On February 24th, I drove to Harrisburg. The State Broadcasting Archive was in a converted warehouse near the rail yards. A gray building with loading docks that had been sealed and a front entrance with a glass door that looked like it belonged to a dentist's office. Inside, it was climate-controlled and fluorescent lit and smelled like the inside of a new refrigerator, clean and cold and slightly chemical. Dana met me in the lobby. She was about my age, efficient, pleasant. She walked me to a small viewing room at the end of a corridor lined with metal shelves. The room had a monitor, a U-matic player that had been maintained for exactly this kind of archival review, and 2 chairs. She loaded the tape. URHP-LIB-9111-03 into the machine, showed me the play and rewind controls, and left me alone. I pressed play. The image was grainy and slightly blue-shifted, consistent with the low-light performance of a studio camera in that era. It showed Studio B at WRHP. I recognized it immediately, the same room I'd been inventorying the previous week, though the equipment and furniture were different. The camera arrangement from the late 80s was visible, a heavier, older model on a pedestal mount. The shot was fixed, a single wide angle from a camera mounted high on the back wall, looking down at the studio floor. The studio lights were off. The only illumination came from the emergency exit sign above the door on the left side of the frame, casting a green wash over the room. The guest desk, the side desk, not the anchor desk, was visible in the lower third of the frame. Just as Cheryl had described, a woman was sitting at the desk. She was motionless. Her hands were flat on the surface. Her posture was upright and still. The image quality was too low to resolve fine facial features at this distance, but the shape of her body, the angle of her shoulders held slightly forward, the set of her head, the haircut, a short, uneven bob. All of it was familiar in a way that made my hands go numb on the edge of the desk. She sat there for 18 minutes. She did not move. She did not speak. The tape had no audio track. There was no timestamp visible in the frame. Nothing happened. The emergency exit sign glowed. The woman sat. The tape recorded. For 18 minutes, a camera preserved the image of a woman doing nothing in a dark room, and the woman was me, or the woman was her, or the woman was the person that both of us are, sitting in the only posture we know, waiting for something we cannot name. At 17 minutes and 40 seconds, she tilted her head slightly to the left, the same tilt, the doorway tilt, as if she heard something on the other side of a wall that wasn't there, as if someone was approaching from 33 years in the future and she was listening for them. Then the tape ended. Static. Blue screen. I pressed rewind and watched it again. I watched the tilt again. I watched the hands flat on the desk. I watched the shoulders. I watched the stillness that I recognized because it was my stillness. The stillness I produce when I am concentrating, when I am waiting, when I am cataloging something in my mind before I write it down. I sat in the viewing room for a long time after the second playback ended. Dana came back and asked if I needed anything. I asked if the tape could be digitized. She said it would take a few weeks, but she could put in the request. I asked if I could have a still frame printed. She said she'd see what she could do with their capture system, and she'd mail it to me. I drove back to Selinsgrove. It was dark by the time I arrived. I went to the station. It was after hours, and the building was dark, one light on in the control room where Phyllis was running the automated evening cycle, but the rest of the building was empty. I used my key and walked down the hallway to Studio B. I turned off the overhead lights. I left the emergency exit sign on. I walked to the side desk and sat down. I put my hands flat on the surface. The desk was cold and slightly dusty. The room was silent except for the HVAC and the faint hum of the exit sign's ballast. The green light washed over my hands and the desk and the floor. I sat there and breathed and listened. I don't know what I expected. I don't know if I expected anything. I think I wanted to feel something, a vibration, a temperature change, a sense of presence, a recognition, something that would tell me the room knew me, that I had been here before, that this body, in this chair, in this posture, was completing a circuit that had been left open for 33 years. I felt nothing. The room was a room. The desk was a desk. I was a woman sitting alone in a dark studio in a building that would be demolished in 6 weeks, and there was no revelation, no contact, no signal from whatever had preceded me. But I sat there for 18 minutes. I know because I timed it on my phone, set face down on the desk so the screen light wouldn't change the room. And at the end, I tilted my head to the left before I stood up. I didn't decide to do it. It happened the way it always happens, a small automatic gesture, as natural as breathing, learned so early or so deeply that it feels like instinct rather than behavior. And I thought. She tilted her head on the tape at 17 minutes and 40 seconds. I tilted mine at roughly the same time. Not because I was imitating her, because that's when I tilt. Because we tilt at the same time, for the same reasons, in the same room, in the same body, decades apart. The tape didn't show me a ghost. It showed me a pattern, and I am the pattern's current expression. I went home. I sat in my apartment. I looked at the walls that someone with my name had once directed her mail to. I ate an apple. I went to bed. Over the following week, I finished the station's physical inventory. I packed the final boxes of tapes for transfer. I completed the personnel file catalog and the broadcast log index. I prepared the disposal recommendations. I was thorough and professional, and I did not mention any of this to Dennis. He was preoccupied with the logistics of closure utility disconnections, insurance cancellations, the transfer of the station's FCC license back to the consortium. He did not have time for impossible things, and I did not have language for them. But on March 2nd, the day before the station's final day of operations, I did one more thing. I went back into the Novell system and opened the catalog module. I navigated to the end of the entry log, the 412th entry, the last one Nora Gatch had made, the tape that was now in Harrisburg, the tape I had watched. Then I scrolled forward. There should have been nothing after her final entry. She resigned on November 22, 1991. No one had used the catalog system after her. The station had never hired another dedicated librarian, and the system had been effectively abandoned for 30 years. The cursor should have hit empty space, but there was a 413th entry. It was dated November 22, 1991, the same day as her resignation, the same day she left the building for the last time. It had been entered at 11:47 p.m., more than 8 hours after the business day ended, after the building should have been empty, after she should have been gone. The entry read, WRHP-LIB-9111-04. Format, unknown. Content, continuation. Condition, in progress. Location, 414 Priestley Avenue, Apartment 2. Note, not yet recorded. Will be completed by the next archivist. She cataloged a tape that didn't exist yet. She assigned it to my home address. She filed it under a format she couldn't identify in a condition that was ongoing. Not good, not fair, not poor, but in progress. A status that doesn't exist in any cataloging system I've ever used because it implies the artifact is still being made, and she designated it as my responsibility. I stared at that entry on the green-on-black screen for a long time. The cursor blinked. The HVAC hummed. The building around me was preparing to be abandoned, and in its oldest, most forgotten system, a woman who was me had left a work order addressed to the future, and the future was now, and I was it. I am the next archivist. I have always been the next archivist. The question I cannot answer, the question that sits at the center of everything I've found and refuses to resolve, is whether I am her successor or her repetition, whether she was a prior version of me or I am a later version of her, whether I was drawn to this job, this building, this town, this apartment by choice, or by the same force that draws a hand to tilt at 17 minutes and 40 seconds. Whether any of my preferences, my shelf system, my handwriting, my haircut, my lunch, my posture, my doorway habit belong to me at all, or whether I am a catalog entry that became a person, an artifact filed under continuation and condition, in progress, slowly completing itself in the shape of a woman who already did all of this once. The station closed on March 3rd, exactly 37 years to the day after Nora Gatch was hired. I turned in my key and my badge. Dennis shook my hand and thanked me for being thorough. Phyllis waved from the control room. Garza was standing by his truck in the lot. He nodded at me as I walked to my car, and he didn't say anything, and his expression was the expression of a man who has confirmed something he hoped was wrong and has decided not to confirm it again. I drove home. I unlocked my apartment. I walked through the doorway with my head tilted, listening for something I have never been able to name. The apartment was quiet. Everything was where I'd left it. Nothing was wrong. But on the kitchen counter, next to my keys, there was a yellow legal pad that I use for grocery lists and notes. I'd left it blank that morning. I am certain of this because I had torn off the previous sheet the night before and thrown it away. The pad was fresh. The top page was clean. It was not clean now. On the first page, in my handwriting, in my exact handwriting, with the backward-leaning N and the deep-dropping G and the rising T cross, was a single line. Thank you for checking. The catalog is almost complete. I haven't written on that pad. I live alone. The door was locked when I returned both the deadbolt and the knob lock, which requires a key from either side. The windows were closed and latched. There was no sign of entry. There was no sign of anything except a sentence in my handwriting that I did not write, on a pad in my kitchen, thanking me for doing the job that I was built, or that she was built, or that we were built to do. I have not thrown the pad away. I have not written on it since. Every morning I check it, the way you check a mailbox, the way you check a catalog for new entries, the way an archivist checks a shelf to see if something has been returned. Not because I believe a ghost is writing to me. I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is that the process continues, that the catalog is a living document and I am both its keeper and its subject, that Nora Gatch Whichever one of us that name belongs to is still logging, still filing, still maintaining the record of what exists and where it's located. And the thing that currently exists and is currently located at 414 Priestley Avenue, Apartment 2, is me. I check the pad every morning. Most mornings, it's blank. I said most. On March 15th, 12 days after the station closed, there was a new line. Same handwriting, same pencil weight. It said, Row 7, Position 34. You'll need it soon. Row 7, Position 34 is the empty shelf at WRHP. The building is locked now. The utilities have been disconnected. Demolition is scheduled for April. I don't have a key anymore. I turned it in on the last day, and Dennis mailed his to the consortium's attorney, and the building is sealed. But I keep thinking about that shelf, about the space where a tape used to sit, about the fact that the catalog entry she wrote for the tape that doesn't exist yet, WRHP-LIB-9 111-04, lists my apartment as its location, but references a shelf position in a building I can no longer enter, about the fact that a catalog entry is, by definition, a record of something that is already real. You don't log what isn't there. You don't assign a shelf position to an absence. You catalog things that exist, unless you're logging what will be there, unless the catalog is predictive rather than descriptive, unless the system she built, the system I maintain, the system I am part of, the system that may be what I am, doesn't record what has happened, but what is going to happen, and the 413th entry is not a description of an artifact, but an instruction for its creation. I don't know what WRHP-LIB-9 is. I don't know what format it will take or what content it will contain. I don't know if it's a tape, a document, a recording, or something else entirely, something that doesn't have a format yet because it hasn't finished becoming what it is. But I know it's assigned to me, and I know it's listed as in progress. And I know that the last archivist, the one who was me before I was me, filed it with a note that said it would be completed by the next archivist. I am completing it right now. This account, this record, these words written in my handwriting on a legal pad in an apartment that she addressed her mail to decades before I moved in. This is the catalog entry in prose form, logged by Nora Gatch, employee ID pending, role, continuation, status, in progress, condition, in progress, location, here, always here, in the same room and the same posture and the same careful, methodical, quiet, precise, private, still, recording hand. I check the pad every morning. I tilt my head at every doorway. I organize my shelves from left to right, top to bottom, the way she did, the way I've always done, the way the next one will. The catalog is almost complete. I don't know what happens when it's finished. I don't know if I'll be the one who finishes it or if there will be another archivist after me with my name and my face and my handwriting sitting in a room I've never seen, finding this document and recognizing it as her own work, feeling the same disoriented recognition I felt when I opened a folder in a filing cabinet and found a life I hadn't lived yet. Already documented, already signed, already filed in the correct alphabetical position. The demolition is in 3 weeks. The building will be gone. Row 7 will be rubble. Position 34 will not exist. But the note says I'll need it soon. And the catalog has not been wrong yet. I check the pad every morning. Most mornings, it's blank.